So, so I often like to start off with this idea that the wandering mind can be a powerful mind. When the idea is that when things line up, when conditions are right, it seems like you get a ton done in less time than others do. And it's like magic because you're wondering, like, why isn't it like this all the time? When the winds and waters, I'll often be using sort of um, um, nautical metaphor. They fill, they're in your favor, they work great, but when they die down, you're just, where was this? How did it get there? And it's like this puzzle that you can't quite solve. So oftentimes you wind up feeling adrift and have a hard time focusing. And maybe you rely on deadlines. That's like the one thing you've kind of figured out. Okay, this is the thing that kind of gets me there. Or there's this, you try to remind yourself of things, but then there's this big sea of sticky notes because you just keep trying to remind yourself and they all kind of drown each other out. And similarly with lists, the same thing happens. They just start to overflow. And sometimes there's this what's called a dark side of flow, that you get into something deeply, but then a lot of other things just fall by the wayside. And then there's this other mess that you're dealing with afterwards. So maybe you try a bunch of different systems and one app after the next, one, pen and paper system or whatever it is. And maybe pick up a thing or two here or there, and that works great. But then a lot of it tends to collapse. Maybe you forgot something major, something minor. And regardless, you wind up maybe feeling like you're not quite getting the meaningful things that, done. And what is and what isn't procrastination can become more obscured here because of, you're trying one system after the next, and you're wondering, okay, what do I do about this? Oftentimes you may have been told as you were growing up, nowadays, whenever, but you're so smart. It's a big common sort of thing that you might be being told. Very creative. You may even know yourself to be that. But oftentimes this contributes to more of a sense of blame, that there's something wrong with me. I don't know what it is. And there are differences, uniquenesses to each person where the things might go awry. I've never seen two people with the same issues. But oftentimes there's this commonality of creativity. These seemingly opposite conditions, the deep work and at the same time complete, disconnect from everything. I like to call it a wandering mind. The thing is, everybody's mind wanders, but it's some wander more than others. And even then, some days more than others, some hours more than others. And some people are, as I mentioned, creative and intelligent and bright and just curious, and they really like to get into something. Some have the absent-minded professor type of feel. Some have anxiety or ADHD or more bright, bored easily. I think there are many different ways to get to the same sort of constellation. A bit about myself before I get too far into it. So I'm a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. Explaining what those are. Psychiatrist means I have some idea of the biology of things. I prescribe medications where they're useful, and I have an idea of neurology of things, although that's kind of a little more distant at this point. But I've gone through the medical training. Psychoanalyst is a broad, deep way of approaching therapy. All the other therapies kind of have branched off from that original tree trunk of psychoanalysis. And it's where CBT and ACT and all these things kind of grew from. Thirdly, I've written a lot about task management, and I think that's most of the way that many of you have probably come to find me here today. I've written about OmniFocus or DepnThink or other things. And for this course, you don't need anything other than pen and paper, but I'll touch on those, on particularly OmniFocus for those who might want to see an example here or there. And lastly, I've been a piano player since the age of 5 and really haven't stopped. So that creative sense and being creative and being in the flow and how important that is, I and all the harrowing feelings that come with it, the simultaneous, oh, this is wonderful, and oh, this is terrible, all that stuff. I try to integrate all of that into whatever it is that I'm trying to present, of trying to get to. I want to be able to be engaged in what I want to do, and make clear decisions about this is what I want to do, and set this aside, and hopefully have that thing come back to me when and where it's useful. So this course developed from several sources. My work with clients directly. Sometimes I would present ideas about what I had written in, being productive or OmniFocus or wherever. And then I'd get this sort of pushback sometimes, especially from those I would say would have a wandering mind, like, oh, this didn't work or that didn't work. And then from there, I started to develop something. And I said, okay, what about this? What about that? And in the meantime, I was also working on it myself, because I have a self-admitted wandering mind. And from there, it kind of grew into the first cohort and the second cohort of students. And, the feedback bounced back, oh, this works. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, this works. Okay. And it kept just growing, it kept becoming a thing. And that's how we're here now. So one of the things that I know can have a very strong pull for some that kind of inspires things is a sharp deadline. Having something at stake, you might even procrastinate to get to that point. There are many problems with deadlines. You can't schedule them yourself. Your mind knows. You consciously, it's not real. So there's no way to fake them. Deadlines also, the real ones, don't line up with each other. They're often coming from multiple places. And they're often painful. Perhaps this, sometimes I'll even muse as an unconscious attempt to punish oneself into doing better, kind of a thing. But regardless, there's a pain involved with it that hopefully would be better to avoid if you can. Then there's trying to get other people involved. Maybe you get a parent, a spouse, a friend. Sometimes this works, particularly if you have some mutuality, like a study group. You create some stakes, like not wanting to let others down if you don't show up. Like I've got a writing group that I do every week. That's very useful. But there are many, many scenarios where there's a certain relentless nature to it, where certain power dynamic structure things inevitably, as caring and kind as everybody is, feed into it and create problems. One person says, I'll use the teenage view, do your homework. And the other says, not now. And because the person who's saying do your homework doesn't know the individual's mind, doesn't know when their mind would be there, in like a good place to be, that there's no winning. The first person says, hey, later, do it later. And then now the task is back on the first person who doesn't know when later is. And as a result, there's a lot of resentment and issues that can be created in that scenario. And then other systems, the lists, the inboxes, the bunch of apps, even entire systems of work. Issue can be that they fall apart often when you could really use them, but you don't know how you could have kept it up to date in the time where it was like, I'll be all right for now. What do you do during those times? And then, as you'd mentioned, the technology, it's a tool, a lot of positives to it. So negatives, there's some drawbacks. The infinite whirlpools of distraction. I like to think of them as a black hole. Like sometimes there's like that event line that you cross and like you're just lost. The event horizon, that's what I meant. So how you set up those barriers in your environment is very important. So the ideal, the thing that we're looking for here is you'd want to be able to start and complete things on your own without relying on a deadline. Or maybe the deadline, you won't have to only leverage that, perhaps. Maybe even do things you don't want to do necessarily, but feel like there's an importance in doing them, so that you can support or get to the things that are meaningful or enjoyable to you, and feel maybe that you're being responsible in doing that. Maybe be able to confidently set things aside with a sense that you could reliably get back to it. That would be nice. Maybe feel you have a way of managing distractions and how you get back when you are. Maybe feel that you can make your environment helpful to you without procrastinating while doing that. Organizing without, you got the report due and not, having a spick and span closet now. And then if you can do these things, then you might be able to feel you can take on more challenging things or larger things like writing a book or a course or learning a language or what some longer term thing. And you could better set some goals for yourself, feel more on top of things. That's what we're aiming for with this. So why is this an issue? Where's the issue come in? So part of the issue is in time and its perception. It's particularly difficult to manage for a wandering mind. It can be hard to remember to do things or bring them from your past to your present. It can be hard to stay with things in the present, remain with them. It can be hard to remind yourself to write tasks, to promise yourself, and that to create a promise for you can fulfill in the future. It can be hard to know how long something will take, perhaps more so than most. And it can be hard to know how long you've been in the middle of something and what's not being addressed in the sidelines. And these are just a few of the issues that come about from time. So this leads to this idea that there's this past you, a present you, and a future you. And more importantly, what I'll be getting into quite a bit is the relationships between these three characters. And it might seem odd to say that there's a relationship, they're all you. But the way I approach it is that each of these characters have their own sense of agency, their own ability to make their own decisions, as if they're different people. Past you said something, thought about something, was in a different world, and said, hey, I think it would be a great idea to do this. Present you get to make your own decisions here in the now, and future you is going to make their own decisions. You can't strong arm them, you can't trick them, you can't do anything, and trying to trick them, they're just going to be upset with you. Past you, they're like, So managing these relationships is vital in order to find some flow that works. And there's got to be an honesty with it. There's got to be something that feels like a connection between these characters. The way I put this is caring for future self, honesty with present self, honor of past self. It seems a bit new agey in saying that, but before I kind of lose you with that, I think there are practical ways of exercising these, and that's what I hope to do. The first and foremost is this idea of honesty with yourself, that in any relationship, trust is the fundamental groundwork. It is the first step. In psychoanalysis, there's Eric Erikson who described 8 stages of a person's development and learning and starting with infancy. And the first thing is trust versus mistrust. And the way they usually kind of teach it is like, oh, then you're done. I figured out trust at the age of, whatever, 6 months or a year. I can't remember exactly. But I think it happens all the time. It's the trust of ourselves, with our environment, or the trust we have in future you, or the trust we have for past you. And chances are this is hurt, it's wounded, it's a sore spot. And sometimes the only way to get yourself to do something is to trick yourself, or at least it feels that way. And then it keeps worsening the lack of trust. You injure yourself. The fake deadlines, I just got to start. These are examples of that sort of ways of faking it. Pretending that your future self will deal with your present mess, whatever that is. Or what if past you asked you to do something you don't feel like doing? You've got to be kind to your present self too. So somewhere in there, you got to deal with this present self that's like, I don't want to. So you got that feeling. What do you do with that? And then every mind has its own natural rhythm. Some things you can predict and many you can't. The waves of focus come and go. The seasons of focus that you mentioned, I like that phrase, seasons of focus. That works well too. Whatever way you get there, it has to feel like you. So there are 2 major approaches that I'll take. One is about the now, and the other is the not now. I've heard this phrase or these distinctions in some forums here and there, where they'll say someone with ADHD, there are only 2 different times, now and not now. And I'll repeat, this is not just for those with ADHD. That's just one version of wandering mind, but I like this distinction. Here is a graphic of what I'll describe as the now. All right, and it's a bit simplified. I've removed a lot of things from the graphic here that I'll be presenting otherwise. But I look at the now, the session of now, like how you are engaging in your work in the moment, as having these components. On the bottom left there, you see the decision. This is how you make a decision. Like, what do you do to make a solid decision of this is where I want my mind to be? And when you do that, you're much more inclined to stay with the work, or if you veer off, be able to return. Then there's the engagement. How do you get into something in a way that's not, oh, I just got to start? There's that period of, there's several decisions to make. There are things to do with your environment. That these things will help you to be there. Then there's the being stage, and I like using the word be. It's not about forcing. It's not about I have to push this. There's the stage where you're with the work, whether it's play or whether it's, there might be frustration, there might be strain, but sometimes you have to get yourself into that through a series of stages before you get there. And so what are those stages? How do you do that? And what do you do when you're frustrated or bored or overwhelmed? Or what do you do when you're confused? You're reading one thing and you're reading the paragraph several times over and you're lost. And then there's this transition period later on that how do you get out of something? How do you avoid that dark side of flow? How do you make it so that you can exit something? And particularly when you might be afraid, I'm never going to come back, or I got to think of this, I got to do this now while it's on my mind. How do you not be enslaved by that notion of I have to do this thing now while the muse is there? So these are about the now, the decision, the beginning, the middle, and end. And when you improve one, you tend to improve the others. You'll notice that I have the M2, 5, 6, and 4. These are where I present them in the course, the module number. And so they're not exactly in order, but for example, if you get good at the transition, you'll be much better equipped to engage. Like if you know that you can get out of something easily, you might be more willing to start it up, for example. So then I move to the not now. This is the what I call the self cycle. This is the not now, and this is the past and the present and the future. This is where the conversations happen. This is where, for example, in the future, I could label these, but you might throw ideas of the future, like the inbox or a mess a bunch of icons sitting of files sitting on the desktop. Here's the stuff I've left. And then you might organize yourself. That's what the M3 is, and M8 as well. That, how do you go about doing that, particularly when organizing may not be something you're thrilled about doing? Where does that happen? And when you do that, though, you create this past self that supports you. You create this past self that's now supporting present self. And so you create that. This is where the cycle comes in. So learning these principles, as I pointed out, don't go exactly in the order that, it's not like I just go now and then not now. Well, there's most of that in there. But I do it in a way that I've structured it so they each build on each other. And with any path of mastery, with any path of learning, you want to be able to retreat. You want to be able to, you hit that challenge that's a little overwhelming or too much, or it feels like I can't do this. And you want a way to scale back. And part of the trouble I find with a lot of systems is that there's no clear way to scale back. And so I've designed this so that it's just in order. As soon as you hit one, it's like, oh man, I feel lost. There's too much stuff. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Go back 1, 2, 3, all the way to the beginning if you want. And that's fine. And then you can just kind of build up again. And that often, could be helpful. So that's the way I kind of designed that. But let me show all of the modules here now. So first module that we'd start with on October 6th, this will be the exploring the nature of the wandering mind and an overview of the course. There'll be a lot of what we're talking about now, but I'll be in some more detail about it. Then I'll get into what I call this anchoring technique. It's about using a pen and paper method to help you list options and decide among them in a way that helps you remember what your focus is. When you get distracted, and still change if you want to at any time, so you're not locked in. You're not you're not forcing yourself to continue with something if you don't want to. That keeping a sense of your agency throughout is vital. I have, you may have already read this. I know I've sent this out on the mailing list a couple of times, but if you can remind me, or I'll try to remind myself, Jeffrey, I'll put a link in the to download the preview PDF thing like a distilled version of this that you can download. I'll put that in the chat. So this it's a very simple method, and it seems like nothing, and yet it makes a big difference. Anyway, I'll get into it during the course. Organizing. Organizing comes next because it's important, but also because it kind of resonates through the rest of the course. And it's not about how to, like, here's a kitchen and here's how you set it up, or here's how you design your DevonThink or Obsidian folders or whatever. It's about kind of the natural universal fundamentals of what goes into making organizing organic. How does that happen? So that instead of just waiting for things to kind of self-organize, you kind of have a way to, once you hit frustration, you have a way to say, oh, okay, how can I think this through so that I can make this better, and do it in a way that's not about derailing yourself, right? Because when you're organizing, you realize how to organize better when you're in the middle of the thing, rather than, sometimes you might think of it elsewhere, but oftentimes it's like when you hit a frustration point. And then we'll look at changing course, how to shift the momentum of flow. So one of the ways I approach flow is like there's a momentum to it. And using reminders, we'll look at the troubles in using reminders, how they may have failed you, some best practices, and then how to arrange them so that they feel more meaningful. So that when they go off, you're like, oh, there's a reason why that's going off. It's helping me highlight a decision that I need to make now, rather than a strong arming of yourself. Oh, it's time, we got to stop now. It's you want to highlight a decision, and hopefully do that in a way that also you can not be afraid that you're going to lose something that you can't come back to. It's a starting of a caring for a future self. Then we'll talk about that engagement, raising sales. First, we consider how to set up the environment to help you direct your attention a bit better, creating stimulation where it could be helpful, removing distractions. We consider those decisions that I mentioned. There's several decisions that help you engage work, particularly if it's tough. It's something you don't want to do. So it's, again, not just about shoving yourself in and saying, yeah, I'll figure it out. And if you start understanding the decisions made, you'll be in a much better shape to be honest with yourself. You could still have those I don't feel like it type of feelings, and hopefully have a way to address them. Staying on course, we'll get into what I call hard work, perhaps, that thing, whatever's stirring up negative feelings, being able to hear out those negative feelings so that you can use them, particularly when you're feeling overwhelmed, confused, bored, maybe angry. It can be useful to have a set of tools to help you along the way. And when you do, there's a tendency for the work to shift from overwhelming or boring to being hopefully more of an engaging puzzle, that it fits into that window of challenge and invites flow. Then we'll look at, consider how to connect to work over a period of time. I think this one comes after the Thanksgiving week, if I remember correctly. So there'll be a break between 6 and 7. And we create a through line with this between past, present, and future selves. You create a guide for yourself. This is the closest to having a system of sorts or a to-do list of sorts that you start being able to manage and meld. And the idea isn't that like you have to do it the way I presented. It's more like, here are the kind of rules that are more fundamentally connected with your own working memory, and how to negotiate that conversation with yourself wherever you put it, whether it's in pen and paper, OmniFocus, Todoist, or any, whatever you want to put it in. So it's a guide you're creating for yourself. So you can set things aside or hopefully build momentum over time with deliberate decision. And when the inevitable storms of life hit, even like shattering whatever it is you built, then this is part of what would be helpful to rebuild things, rather than just wait and say, I don't know how I got there. And because you're going to be in a different place anyway, you can't just go back to what you had. Oftentimes you're like, oh, why this doesn't work anymore? Well, you want the fundamentals so you can build something that will fit your present environment better, whether you've changed, the world's changed, or both. And then we'll extend our care for future self by learning how we can better create messages to ourselves. This is about tasks and lists. How do we write those tasks? How do we write those lists so that they're more inviting rather than abusive sort of things that we do to ourselves? We want to respect our sense of agency. And then we'll take on messes. What do we do with all the buckets that we have? The overflowing inbox and whatever else. When we can manage them, we can purposely create a space for the decisions we're setting aside. Instead of putting up, so for oftentimes, the inbox is listed first. And in some task system, and I think it's for a wandering mind in particular, that's just not going to work well, because it requires everything else that we get into. How do you deal with something you don't want to get into? How do you deal with a challenge? How do you deal with boredom? How do you deal with setting things aside? How do you feel about the things you haven't done yet? All of these things are, there's many things to address before you get to an inbox. But the inbox, the guide, and the first thing, the anchor, those three things are going to be the main tools, if you will, that we'll be using. Finally, we'll hit this graduation where we're going to summarize, bring all the ideas together, and attempt an exercise that will bring all the ideas together, something that you can do however often you want to feel settled. It's an exercise of feeling settled. It's like, how do I make it so that I feel like the things that I need to have in front of me are in front of me, and everything else is set aside in a way that makes sense to me. And it'll be kind of like playing the piano or tennis or martial art, or you're going to do all these tiny little things throughout, and with practice, hopefully, all those tiny little things eventually just become a forehand stroke, or all of those strokes become you on the tennis court. It's not easy. But at least you'll have a path laid out for you, which removes, I think, a lot of the difficulty that would otherwise be there. And I've really tried to set it up so that you can take the challenge at your own pace as you see fit. So basically, this is about struggling with attention, constantly fighting yourself rather than finding flow, relationships often being burdened by needing to keep you on track. You find flow, but you don't know how you got there. There's that mystery to it. Inbox or whatever, there's messes all around you, projects that are just like, mocking you from the corner kind of a thing. Responsibilities getting lost and losing track of things. Fearing taking on commitments because you can't keep promises to yourself, that kind of thing. It's not about perfection in any of these things, but it's about having a way and exercises to like build yourself up and develop as you run into issues so that these happen much less often. And also, you got to be willing to engage in this online class. There's, I think part of the difficulty of a wandering mind is how hard it can be to interact with others. You wind up, there are those who can, not everybody, but I think some can wind up being quite introspective and not wanting to engage. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that there's goodness to that. I can be quite introspective myself. But I think there's also a lot of benefit that happens in these sort of in classes and online environments. There's a reason why we have kids go to school, and college kids, and something happens. It comes alive in a way that's different, I think. And there's a set pacing to it, so there's an accountability to it, which is important. And there's a lot of wonderful support that I've noticed in the classes as I've done them, where somebody will have an idea and somebody else will have a great suggestion. And and the prompts and exercises as I present them give this wonderful sort of framework and network to kind of like build on that. And I've had people after the classes, connect and stay connected, and they all support each other in wonderful ways. So it's really neat to see. Let's see. So it's a gradual pace over 10 weeks. There's 10 modules. There are 9 implementation Q&A sessions. Really, it's 9.5 weeks, but I've wanted to avoid that because of the movie title, but whatever. I guess I could say 9.5 weeks. In terms of how much time to devote, well, the lecture one is 1.5 hours, and the other one is 1 hour, the Q&A one. And then whatever time you want to spend in the forums and discussion is there as well. And then I don't, there are exercises involved, and I'll kind of show, at the end of every lesson, like, here are the exercises. But the hope is that the exercise will really be something that you integrate into your days and into your week. So it's not like extra work. It's not like something more you have to do in addition to whatever else you're doing. It would hopefully be something you're doing that would support whatever you're already doing. And so feel like it's giving you a net positive. That's the hope. All right, there's a bunch of blah, blah, blah. There are a bunch of testimonials on the website. You can read them there if you like. But I'm going to show off one in particular that made me feel all warm and tingly. I'll read it out loud here. Course has not only given me a few tools, but has actually given me the means to leverage those tools into a system that allows me to process what really is almost 50 years worth of accumulated desires that are represented by reams of Post-its, papers, notebooks, etc., which I've been carrying around. And what I've learned is called a doom box. I love that phrase, doom box. These are all the undone things that, for what I think of as psychological reasons, I've not been able to attend to. And the course has given me the mechanism, the muscles to develop a system to attend to them, a way to guide myself to attend to them, and then a system for actually attending to them. And that's been, as I say to everyone who asks, a life changer. I wake up happy. I've not done that for most of my life. It was just warmed me up, and I love that. And I had to if I can share that one, I'm sharing that one. Cart's already open. Cart closes October 2nd. Classes begin on the 6th. Yeah, those are the things. I think that's it. So let's stop here.